So last time we met, we were discussing progressive beliefs about being optimistic in their vision. They believed in economy for small business, as Jonathan said before. A society that was responsible for the individual. I mean, if someone was poor and in need, who was supposed to take care of them? Back then, it was themselves, but under a progressive era, who's supposed to take care of them? The government, us, the social safety net. They want to provide welfare. They don't want laissez-faire. And women should play a role. We talked about muckrakers, and they were investigative journalists. Not this, but more unveiling corruption, like Standard Oil, Lincoln Steffens, and municipal corruption. We talked about The Octopus in the Pit by Frank Norris. And John Spargo was a book that criticized what? Child labor, so we're aware of that as well. Muckrakers helped expose these problems so that we knew what issues needed to be tackled. Well, today we're going to talk about these middle-class women and the roles that they played to try to make society better. Now, as we previously stated, we said that middle-class women were deeply inspired by what? Jane Addams and the settlement house movement. So were women already in the field trying to make society better? Yeah, so once we found out about all these other problems besides these maybe immigrant slum problems, we realized, hey, we're already helping immigrant communities. Why don't we help everyone too? And so as inspired by Hull House and Jane Addams, you have the rise of the settlement house movement and more women reformers. Everyone good so far? Excellent. So two of the organizations created by women at this time include the Women's Bureau and the Children's Bureau. So two organizations that women created to try to help their movement at the time was the Women's Bureau and the Children's Bureau. And the Women's Bureau and the Children's Bureau were both organized to what? What do you think?
To improve the society, or like improve the working conditions for the children and to get rights for the women?
Exactly. The whole purpose of the Women's Bureau and the Children's Bureau was to improve working conditions for both women and children. Because, let's be honest, folks, was anyone really standing up for women and children? No. You look back at the American Federation of Labor, who fought for like a 10-hour workday and better working conditions. Did they include women? No, they were mostly fighting for men. And so women decided to take the stage and say, well, what about us? What about our rights? And what about the children? And so they created the Children's Bureau and the Women's Bureau, both still in existence today as part of the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor, of course, again, was once headed by Hilda Solis, La Puente High School alumni. I just like bringing that up because it's cool. Anywho, folks, so some of the other reforms that these women involved themselves in included temperance. So temperance, we already know. Temperance was the goal of doing what? Abolishing alcohol. Very good. So one of the new organizations that emerges at this time is the Women Christian Temperance Union, led by a woman named Frances Willard. And the Women's Christian Temperance Union, or the WCTU, led by Frances Willard, as always, their goal was to try to abolish alcohol in America. They believed that alcohol led to what other problems in society? Abuse, crime, violence, drugs, prostitution. I mean, these were all problems that they believed caused by alcohol. So they said alcohol had to go, and who did they say wanted alcohol to be eliminated? According to WCTU, who willed it? God says that alcohol should be eliminated. And so they began to promote the ending of alcohol. Here's a poem written by them. It's actually a pretty good poem. It's an acrostic for a saloon that reads, "Scattering seeds of destruction and death abroad through the land with your withering breath. License for breeding corruption and shame, oppression and crime of every name. Only the parent of sorrow and gloom. Nothing too quickly can hasten your doom. Don't drink." It's really the idea behind this poem. But again, the argument is that they don't want you to drink, and what they would do is, unlike the Hatchetonians, remember the Hatchetonians? They would go and destroy all the bars. A lot of the WCTU women would stand outside bars and protest. They would pick it and be like, don't go in there, God doesn't want you drinking. It's the devil's rum. And so they try to get people not to go. They'd have people sign petitions. They'd have them sign pledges saying, I, as Mr. King, promise not to drink anymore. They would sign these pledges. Well, that was fine, but they also teamed up with, here they are just breaking casks of bourbon. They also teamed up with the Anti-Saloon League. And the Anti-Saloon League's goal was to make every state, what kind of state? A dry state. So their goal was to make every state a dry state. Okay, so the goal was to make every state a dry state. To close all the saloons. And saloon is just a fancy name for what? A bar. So again, they want to close up all the saloons in the country, make every state a dry state. And they had a pretty unique campaign. During World War I, and we're going to go in and out of World War I as we go through this lecture today, but during World War I, as they tried to ban alcohol, they campaigned that during World War I, alcohol was un-American. They said drinking alcohol is un-American. Now think about this for a second, folks. It's World War I. You're here in the States. You're not fighting off in the war. You're here in America. Why might it be un-American for you here in America to drink? Think about that for a second. Don't shout it out. Just think about that for a second. Why might it be considered for you to be here in America and drinking? Sometimes they might call you a traitor. Giovanni?
Is it because the alcohol is made from other countries?
It's not because we grow our own products to make the alcohol. Amanda? Huh? Okay, well, the Irish drink, but we all drink too, let's say in society. But they're saying, why would it be bad or for you to be considered un-American to be drinking? Yeah.
Maybe their ideas are like, maybe the other country they're fighting is, they're fighting because they're drunk or something. Maybe they're trying to protest that.
Maybe they're fighting because the other country is drunk and then that might be the cause. Okay, that's a good guess, but not that either. Yeah, Maria?
Because they're here drinking while someone over there is dying.
That's also part of it. The idea that, hey, you're having a good time while that guy's dying. Yeah?
You should be fighting the war instead of drinking.
You should be fighting the war instead of drinking. It's also a good point of it. But let's say you are here because you didn't go off and fight. Why would it be bad for you to be drunk and, let's say, working in the factories?
You can die.
Not that you can die, but what are you responsible for while these men are off and fighting? What is your responsibility during the war if those other men are fighting? What is your responsibility? What are you making? Guns, bullets, tanks, cars, whatever, right? And if you're drunk while doing that, are you helping the war effort? No, it's almost like you're sabotaging the war effort while you're drunk. Is that my phone? While you're drunk at the factory. So the idea behind it was that they believed that you should not be drinking during the war because they're often fighting, and it's your responsibility to make sure that every bullet that you make is a good bullet and not made in a drunken stupor. But here's the other thing. What is alcohol made of? Wheat. Yeast, wheat. And what else can we make wheat into? Bread. So what's better for the war effort? Alcohol for you or bread for the troops? Bread for the troops. And so the other argument is drinking is un-American because we need that wheat for the troops, not for you and your drunkenness. And so that's the argument that they made. Well, it's a pretty decent campaign, folks, that wheat should be used for food, not liquor. And so in 1916, several states begin to pass, or 19 states pass what is known as the Volstead Act. In 1916, 19 states passed what is known as the Volstead Act. And what the Volstead Act did was that it banned alcohol in their state. It banned the transportation, possession, consumption, and manufacture. So pretty much it banned alcohol completely by 1916 in 19 different states. By 1919, 36 states voted to become what? To become dry states. And when 36 states voted to become dry states, that was enough states in order for the Volstead Act to become what? Not just, it was a law in the states. Not just a bill, more than that. 36 states voted for this to become law in their states, and Congress passed it too, which means if you have 3/4 of all states and 2/3 of both houses of Congress, the Volstead Act becomes the 18th Amendment. And in 1920, the 18th Amendment is passed, and the 18th Amendment is the prohibition of what? Alcohol in America. In 1920, the United States banned alcohol across the country. It bans alcohol completely. If you were a state that did not vote dry, are you still supposed to follow this law now? Yes, it's now the law of the land. It's a constitutional amendment. And so in 1920, prohibition becomes the law, and the United States votes to be dry in 1919. Well, folks, by July 1st, America was officially going to become dry, so people said, buy now and drink up, because by July 1st, you were not allowed to have alcohol anymore. So people got drunken stupors in the last few days, and then that was it. Now, what happened because they banned alcohol? They lost money, definitely, but did people still find ways to drink alcohol?
Yeah.
You see the rise of bootlegging, moonshining, whatever else. You start seeing the rise of the drug gangs and mafias and whatever else. But we'll talk about them in the next unit. But this Prohibition era gets become pretty violent. But there were 3 basic groups that were still allowed to have alcohol if they got a license. Who got to have alcohol still? Not the rich. Priests. So churches got to have alcohol because it was for the religious ceremonies. Who else could use alcohol? Doctors. Doctors need alcohol to clean instruments for surgeries, whatever else. And certain industries, like factories, they would need alcohol to clean their supplies, whatever else. But other than that, you weren't allowed to have alcohol anymore. What do you think the church did? They would sell their alcohol illegally and say, well, I'm doing it for my own parishioners. Companies did the same. Yeah, many people sold alcohol illegally. People, again, would bootleg it and sell it illegally in the U.S. But it's the 18th Amendment. This lasts for 13 years, folks. It lasts for 13 years. But in any case, folks, did they succeed at temperance? They succeeded. And so that's one of the first major wins, is by 1920, temperance is finally a success. And here they are destroying that octopus known as the saloon, which resulted in what? What did alcohol lead to, according to this cartoon? Corruption, partnership with thieves, gambling, trafficking in girls, defiance of the law. I mean, all these were problems caused by alcohol, and did we put an end to it? With prohibition, that was all done with. And so that's what happened there. Next up we're going to talk about then is women's rights. Carrie Chapman Catt is back, and she's going to fight for women's rights again. She wants women to have the right to vote. And so they protest. And Carrie Chapman Catt is in charge of what organization? What's it called? What's that organization called that fought for women's suffrage? If you just know the initials, that's fine too. Sounds like an organization that sends people into space. NAWSA. NASA. Who can tell me what it stands for? National American Women's Suffrage Association. So NASA. So NASA comes back, and again, they campaign pretty awesomely. Bring all voters into the world. Women do that, so it's pretty awesome. Anyway, they demand that the president give women the right to vote. The president says what? No, I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's the right time or place. But women continue to fight. But women start getting the right to vote where? In the West, in the state level. So women begin to earn the right to vote at the state level in the Western states. So even though women can vote now, let's say in California, can they vote for a president yet? No, but they can vote for like California governor. So the Western states begin to give women the right to vote starting in 1869. That's when women start earning the right to vote. And the Western states follow suit. Other Western states start giving them partial voting rights. But the interesting part is that the Eastern states, which have been around since 1776, have they given women the right to vote yet? No, so the ones that have been around the longest are the last to give women the right to vote. The reason why, folks, is this. Remember when we talked about the frontier? What was the frontier's treatment of men and women? Did the frontier treat them differently?
Yeah.
The frontier? No, men and women were equal, right? Because does Mother Nature care if you're a man or a woman? No. So did women and men have to work side by side equally to survive in the frontier? Yeah. Whereas in the city, does a woman have to work sometimes? Sometimes, but mostly it's men. And so here in the East Coast, they were used to gender roles. Was that as true in the West? In the West, men and women had to work equally, so was it easier for women to gain equality working on the frontier? That's why that began in the West. Well, that was too slow, and so a woman by the name of Alice Paul decided, no, we want the right to vote now, and so Alice Paul creates what is known as the National Women's Party. And the National Women's Party, they campaigned and they criticized the president for opposing women's suffrage. Saying, President Wilson, and we'll talk about President Wilson later, why do you oppose women's suffrage? And he said, I don't think it's time. But again, they opposed President Wilson. Again, that sign there says, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? And one of the things that they criticized was that during World War I, what were we fighting for? World War I, what was America fighting for? To make the world what? Equal, but they're trying to promote what across the world? Democracy, right? Wasn't the World War I fought to make the world safe for democracy? That was the whole point of World War I. And yet, we're fighting for the Germans to have democracy, and yet are we giving women democracy here in our country? No, so they said President Wilson is deceiving the world when he appears as the prophet of democracy. President Wilson has opposed those who demand democracy for this country. He is responsible for the disenfranchisement of millions of Americans. We in America know this, the world will find him out. So they campaigned on the White House front lawn saying, why won't the president give women the right to vote? By the way, it's not the president's job to do that. That's Congress and the states. But still, they said, why won't the president support women's right to vote? And he said, it's just not the right time. So they campaigned and they protested. And eventually, Alice Paul was arrested for campaigning. And she was sent to jail for protesting to give women the right to vote. And women wanted Alice Paul released. But here she is in prison. In any case, the president still refused to release Alice Paul despite her being a political prisoner, demanding the right to vote. But President Wilson eventually changes his mind. And eventually in 1919, the president says, this is the time to support woman suffrage. So President Wilson changes his mind eventually. And the reason why President Wilson changed his mind is because of World War I. Why did World War I, you think, change the mind of the president during World War I?
Because women started working the same jobs as men.
Yeah, women worked the same jobs as men. Why?
Because the men were fighting.
Yeah, the men went off to fight, and who took those jobs? Women did. And were women essential to winning the war? Without women, who would make the tires and the planes and the guns and the artillery? Who would be the nurses? Women helped us win that war. And so because of the role that women played in World War I, did we have to give them the right to vote? Almost like they earned the right to vote. Because of the role that women played in World War I, according to President Wilson, they earned the right to vote. And so, you see the steamrolling of progress, and again, the criticism of Wilson continued, but eventually, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, granting women the right to vote. So finally, after several years, women finally earn the right to vote in 1920. And many men were concerned about this happening, like women would just leave the kids with the men now. Like, all right, now it's my turn. I've been the woman for like 50 years. Now you go take care of the kids. I'm going to go and vote. But that's not what really happened. But still, 19th Amendment, women earned the right to vote in 1920. Is that a big deal, folks? Is that a huge victory for the women's suffrage movement? Fighting since 1848, right? Seneca Falls. Now they finally attained it. How many years later? 72 years later. It's a huge gain. Here's the thing, though, folks. Women's suffrage. The question is, was it a success? In 1900, could women vote? No, right? So only men were voting up until 1920. So let's look at the numbers. In 1900, 73% of the eligible voting population could vote. 1904, 65. 1908, 65. 1912, 59. 1916, 62. In 1920, who could vote? Women. So what do you expect to happen to the percentage of voters who actually voted? It should increase, right? But it didn't. Now that women could vote, the percentage of eligible voters actually dropped. Why? The percentage of people that could vote, that did vote, dropped. Why?
Because men probably didn't vote in high school.
Men did still vote, but women did not vote. Or at least many women did not vote. So here's the thing, folks. Despite women finally earning the right to vote, very few women actually voted in the first few years. Because were there some women who opposed the right to vote? There were many women that said, voting, no, that's the world of men. Women don't vote. Women will get corrupted. Women's role is in the home. The men vote. We separate the two lives. Right? Cult of domesticity. That's the women's role. Not the idea of voting. And so once women got the right to vote, did all women rush out and vote in 1920? No. Very few women actually voted because you had several, what you know as anti-suffragettes. Anti-suffragettes were women who opposed the right to vote. Now that might sound crazy to you today, but there were women at the time that said, no, women, it's not that they don't deserve the right to vote, it's that women shouldn't vote. It's wrong for society. It confuses things. It ruins the roles of men and women should not vote. So, here's the question then. Was women's suffrage a success?
It was sort of for the people that wanted to vote.
Yeah, I would say it's somewhat of a success. Because did we earn women's suffrage? We did, right? Is it going to take time for women to learn to exercise that right? Yeah. So we got it, and that's awesome. Did women all jump onto the opportunity right away? No, but are we okay with that? That's fine. Because people didn't vote. Screw it. Let's just take away the right to vote. They're not using it anyway. No, we're going to keep it. But this is a big gain. Just note, though, that it wasn't an immediate success. That it was something that we had to gain over time or learn to use over time. Any questions about women's suffrage? But, again, big win, right? Awesome. So temperance, we got that. Women's suffrage, we got that. So all good things. But of course, though, as happens with U.S. history every so often, someone comes out and makes a really awesome video. And so what we're going to watch right now. Other reform movements of the temperance era are state reform. So while we're fighting for women's suffrage, we were also fighting for state improvements. These are reforms promoted by the state, oftentimes led by governors and the people. There are really 4 state reforms you need to know. And the idea was that they all wanted to promote this idea of direct democracy. Folks, in a democracy, who gets to make the rules? Who gets to make the laws in a democracy? The people, right? We vote. Now, in the government that we have today, do you and I, or did we vote for laws? Did you and I make laws? Do you and I make laws for the country today? Who makes the laws for us? Congress, right? We are representatives. So, what we had in America, what we still have in America, is a republic. We have people that make laws for us. Do you guys understand that so far? We have a republic where we elect people to make laws. The problem is, did that kind of take us out of the lawmaking process? And what if we wanted a law that our congressman refused to pass? Does that mean it just never becomes a law? That's kind of the way it was. So the states decided, fine, we can't tell Congress what to do, but each individual state can choose to give more power back to its state citizens. So they began to pass a series of new procedures. The first was called initiative. And an initiative is when the people can introduce a bill that could maybe become a law. So an initiative is when the people introduce a bill. That's an initiative, when the people introduce a bill. I'll give you one really good example. The legalization of marijuana. In California, would your assemblymen and California state senators, would they be willing to introduce a bill to legalize marijuana? No, because they probably would lose office, right? Like, their voters would vote them out. But do people in California want to legalize marijuana? Some do. So what the people decided to do is they said, I know our government officials won't do it, so we should do it ourselves. So the people that want to legalize marijuana collected thousands of signatures, and when they got enough signatures, I think it's like 250,000 signatures, it got to become an initiative. And then, can people now vote to see if it could become a law or not? But would that have ever happened if we didn't have that power? No, so the initiative allows people to introduce laws or introduce bills. Now, will that still likely get voted down by our congressmen or our officials? So they also introduced another procedure called a referendum. And a referendum is when the people get to vote on laws. So not only did the people get to introduce a bill about marijuana legalization several years ago, but the people could also vote on marijuana legalization. Now, what happened in the state of California? How did the people vote? They voted against the legalization of marijuana. Because even though you have enough votes, let's say, to make it a bill, does that necessarily mean you're going to have enough votes to make it a law? Because you only need like 250,000 votes to make a bill, but you need like 3 million votes to make it a law. But you do have enough to make it a bill. So that's what happened here. Does this give the American people, or at least the California people, let's say, more of a say in the government, though? It gives us more of a voice, because before, these people are making all the decisions for us. Now, do we get to make some choices of our own? That's one of the biggest changes. Another shift is recall. If a president is bad, what are you allowed to do? You can impeach them, right? But that's a whole trial. You have to go through that entire process. And are we involved in the impeachment of a president? As the American people, do we get involved in that at all? No, that's Congress and the Senate, right? They take care of that. But if you want to get rid of, let's say, your governor, you get to recall. And a recall means to vote someone out of office. So the last time a governor of California was recalled was, I think, in 2002, when Governor Gray Davis was recalled. And in that election that we recalled Governor Gray Davis, Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California. So in the same time that we recalled Governor Gray Davis, we had to vote twice. Do you vote to recall the governor? And if yes, who do you want to be the next governor of California? And that's when Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California. Is when we recalled Gray Davis and we replaced him with Arnold Schwarzenegger as the next governor of California. Questions there? That's kind of how that works then. So, initiative, referendum, recall. Everyone good on those three so far? The people get to introduce a bill. The people get to vote on a bill. The people get to recall a government official. Is that giving us as people a lot more power? It's giving us tremendous power more than before. One other thing that the people could now do was the direct election of senators. Now the people can elect their senators directly. Before, the state assembly would elect senators, or the governor would appoint senators. Now, the people get to vote for their senators. So again, is that more democracy and power for the people? A lot more. So you have the direct election of senators, and when most states adopt the direct election of senators, this becomes the 17th Amendment in 1913, where the people get to vote directly in 1913 to vote for their senators directly. Always a good thing. Always.
So people were able to vote for senators?
They were able to vote for their senators. Because before, we didn't get to vote. Our government officials chose for us. So like the governor would choose who would be the senator from California. Or like our state assembly would choose who would be the senator from California. But now we get to choose, which is a lot more power for the people. Good there?
Mm-hmm.
There's also the Australian secret ballot, because Australia did it first. And really, the Australian secret ballot is kind of what voting looks like today. It's a secret ballot. Because before, folks, if you were going to vote, you'd get a piece of paper, you might write your name on the top of that piece of paper, and then you would vote. And yeah, it's kind of secretive, but couldn't I go to the ballot box later, open it up, and see who you voted for? Yeah, and let's say I was your boss, and I said, hey, you better vote for this guy or I'll fire you. So I find out later, I go to the ballot box, I open it up, and I steal it, and I look to see who all my employees voted for. If they voted for the wrong guy, all those people are fired. So what they tried to do was to try to make this completely blind. And so today, folks, the way you vote, you come in and you register first. You say, oh, I'm this person, and they give you a blank ballot with no identifying information, and you just vote. And then you're done. Like imagine ASB elections if you had to write your name on the ballot and then sign it. It wouldn't be very anonymous. And say your friends say, hey, will you vote for me? Like, oh yeah, totally, I'll vote for you. But then you didn't because you thought the other person would be better. But then you told them that you were, and then they looked at the ballots later and they saw that you didn't vote for them. You got messed up. But with the Australian secret ballot, you don't have to worry about that anymore because we try to protect your identity with the Australian secret ballot. And does that make us more comfortable with voting? If no one can know who we vote for, you feel a little bit better. Because let's say, for example, say you were, I don't know, you wanted to reinstate slavery. So you voted for that. But would you want other people to know that's what you wanted? It'd be a very unpopular idea. So you want them to keep it on the down low. That's kind of how that works. In any case, folks, these state reforms were headed by these three governors in their respective states. So Robert Fighting Bob La Follette, he was the governor of Wisconsin who fought for these state reforms. Hiram Johnson of California, he also fought for these state reforms. And Charles Evan Hughes of New York, he fought for these reforms as well. So just know the names because they may come up as just, who were these guys? They're also good examples of progressive reformers. Fighting Bob La Follette, Hiram Johnson, and Charles Evan Hughes. Good? Almost. I don't know about you, but it makes me happy knowing whenever California comes up as like a thing. I'm like, oh, California governor. That's my state. Makes you feel good. I what it's like to be from a state that doesn't come up very often. Like, no offense to anyone from Delaware, but how often you be like, hey, and then Delaware, not a state that comes up very often in history. Anyway, let's talk about labor reform. So, one of the people that headed labor reforms was Florence Kelley. And Florence Kelley's goal was to do two things. Number one, end sweatshops. And two, ban child labor. Now, what are sweatshops, folks?
Usually by little kids.
They're not necessarily operated by little kids. But when you think of a sweatshop, what do you think of?
I think of hard work in
Yeah, like hardworking, but like, what are the conditions of that sweatshop? Are they good conditions, bad conditions? It's bad, poor ventilation, very dark, very dangerous. I mean, we already complain about working conditions in general at this time, right? Like long hours and horrible working conditions. Sweatshops were even worse than already bad working conditions in the 1900s. And so Florence Kelley said, whoa, you can't have working conditions like this. These are very dangerous and very unsanitary. And kids are still working in the mines. That's not okay. And so Florence Kelley tried to fight sweatshops, and they tried to ban child labor was her goal. And so one of the things that she did was she created something called the National Consumer League. And the National Consumer League tried to encourage Americans to buy, what's the word I'm looking for? They tried to convince Americans to not buy sweatshop-made goods. One way to put it. They tried to convince Americans not to buy sweatshop-made goods. So again, they'd have the seal on the clothing that said, made under clean and healthful conditions. Use of label authorized after investigation, National Consumer League. So you would only buy shirts or clothes that had that logo on it. Because then you knew that it was safe to eat. You know, like you wouldn't take medicine that wasn't tested by like the Drug Administration, right? Like, oh, medicine, I found it on the street. I should try this. No, you want to make sure it's clean and healthy and safe. And so that's what the National Consumer League did. But they said, all the clothes that you're buying from this store were not made with child labor. They were not made with sweatshop labor. Even today, don't a lot of Americans try to do this as best they can? They say, made in America, full wage, fair wage workers, all that stuff. Like free trade coffee. Coffee made with like fair wages is the idea. And again, she tried to encourage people because she said to buy means to have power. To have power means to have responsibility. Because if people stopped buying sweatshop labor goods, what would happen?
They would have to close down.
Yeah, the sweatshop laborers would close down, or sweatshops would close down, and maybe those workers could find better work, is really the hope. So again, National Consumer League was attempting to end sweatshop labor and child labor. That's what they did. Well, anyway, 2 Supreme Court cases came down the wire. The first was Lochner v. New York. And in the Supreme Court case of Lochner v. New York, the Supreme Court ruled that you could not force someone to work more than 10 hours a day. You could not force someone to work more than 10 hours a day. So let's say you were supposed to get off at 8 o'clock. Could your boss say, hey, you work until 10 or I'll fire you? No. They could not force you to work more than 10 hours a day, which is good because if you want to go home, is the law now on your side?
Yeah.
Before, the boss said, hey, you keep working or I'll fire you and I'll find someone else to do your job. Well, with Lochner v. New York, it promised to make sure that they could no longer force people to work more than 10 hours a day. Yes?
People wanted to.
Could they choose to work more than 10 hours? Yes. So maybe you want extra money because Christmas is coming up. You want extra money in your pocket. You could choose to work more than 10 hours. But you can't be required to work more than 10 hours a day. Now, they might get tricky and say, hey, you're off at 10 o'clock today? Well, that's cool, but you haven't put away all these clothes. Are you going to finish doing that? Like, no, I want to go home. Like, okay, well, if you go home and don't finish putting away all those clothes, then you're welcome to do that. But just don't bother coming back tomorrow. Because I thought you were the kind of worker that was not here just for the money. I thought you were going to be a team player and work above and beyond. But I guess you're here just for the money, and I'm going to look for someone who's willing to work more than just 10 hours a day. And so they would do that way. They kind of trick you, bribe you, guilt trip you. The goal was to try to pay you, to try to make you work without having to pay you. Many big industries, Walmart, for example, was accused of this. There was a huge lawsuit against Walmart because they were trying to get their workers to work without getting paid by saying, hey, I know you're off at 9, but can you finish putting away all those clothes because they're not done yet? And if the person said no, they're like, oh, okay, well then don't come back tomorrow. We'll find someone else who can. So yeah, they're not forcing you to work the extra hour or so, but are they pretty much forcing you? Yeah, they're coercing you. Another Supreme Court rule was Mueller v. Oregon. Mueller v. Oregon, this was for the ladies. Mueller v. Oregon said women were not allowed to work more than 10 hours. Even if you wanted to. Women were not allowed to work more than 10 hours. Which is good in the sense that, yay, women don't have to be forced to work more than 10 hours anymore. But the reasoning is kind of messed up. Again, Mueller v. Oregon said women were not allowed to work more than 10 hours, even if they wanted to. And the reason why is because they said women were weak. So, not the best reason for passing this law. I mean, it's great victory for women in the sense that women don't have to work more than 10 hours, but the reasoning for it is because women suck. So, it's kind of a win, but not the win that you want. It's like, hey, you don't have to go to school anymore. All right. It's because everyone hates you. It's not the victory that you wanted. And so that's kind of what happened here. Women don't have to work more than 10 hours, but it was backhanded. And it says, yeah, you don't have to work more than 10 hours because you can't handle it. So it's kind of a win, not a complete win, but it's there. But again, some victories so far. Then there was the Keating-Owens Act of 1916. And the Keating-Owens Act developed monsters to destroy children. It's featured here in this picture. What the Keating-Owens Act did was it banned the transportation of child labor-made goods. The Keating-Owens Act banned the transportation of child labor-made goods. So again, the Keating-Owens Act banned the transportation of child labor-made goods across state lines or between states. The idea was if you can't transport child labor-made goods, what's going to happen?
You lose money.
Yeah, no one's going to buy your stuff because they can't get it in the first place. So they said, here's how we're going to end child labor. You can make the coal with child labor, but no one else is going to be able to buy it. Yes?
Did they ever take away the children from their parents because of that?
You mean like you're a bad parent because you're making your child work? Or like, I'm going to steal your child to make them work?
Yeah.
Oh, the other. Okay, the latter. No, because maybe if it was like, hey, you owe me money and you're not paying me back, fine, then someone's going to have to work. Okay, your child's going to be a debt slave to me until you pay it back. But very rarely did it happen in America. Other countries, very often. Today, still happens a lot in other countries. But in America, very rarely did that happen because we are still technically a democracy, and that would be like slavery was really frowned upon, especially because of slavery in America. So you don't have that happening so much. You have kind of debt slavery, but not as much as you would think. In any case, the Keating-Owens Act banned the transportation of child labor-made goods. The hope was to end child labor. But in 1918, in a really awesome named Supreme Court case of Hammer v. Dagenhart, which is a cool sounding Supreme Court case name. If I had a kid, Hammer Dagenhart King, right? That'd be like, oh. By the way, I was talking to my wife. If I had a kid, I'd want to name him Caesar Reyes King, because that just means king, king, king.
Caesar?
Caesar means king.
Ray?
Ray, like Ray,
I don't know.
Spanish. So Caesar Reyes King be king, king, king.
What did she say?
She said no. My wife refused. But Hammer v. Dagenhart, in the Supreme Court case of Hammer v. Dagenhart, it overturned the Keating-Owens Act, saying that it violated what? Interstate commerce. It overturned the Keating-Owens Act, saying it violated interstate commerce. So here's that little kid saying, what did the Supreme Court say, Dad? And the dad said, they're okie dokie with minors. Get it? They're minors. Again, that it violated interstate commerce. That's why they overturned the Keating-Owens Act. This political cartoon here suggests what about children then? Not the one about the kid, but you know what, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? Who doesn't get life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? The children do. And what's being suggested here in this bottom part of the image? What's happening here?
She's a slave to labor.
She's a slave to labor. So again, Hammer v. Dagenhart overturned Keating-Owens, saying that it violated interstate commerce, but what it ends up doing is that it kind of keeps kids working in this child labor system. So even by 1918, folks, we still had child labor in this country. Kind of upsetting, but it's there. The other major thing that happened with regard to labor reforms is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911. What happened was that there was a factory fire and 146 women died in the blaze. Let me give you the details after. But what you need to know first off is that in this shirtwaist factory fire, 146 women died. Let me give you the details, which you don't have to write down unless you choose to, and then I'll give you the significance that you need to know afterwards. What happened was that these women were working on the 11th floor of this building, and it was a clothing factory. Well, what happened was that the business owners wanted to make sure that the women were not leaving for smoke breaks and whatever else, so they would chain the doors shut so the women couldn't go out the front doors up on the 11th floor. So women would be inside this shirt factory smoking. Now, what may eventually happen that did happen? Something caught fire because you're smoking in a cloth factory. Well, it did catch fire and a huge blaze emerged in this building. Now, this is pre-fire regulation codes, and so this building did not have fire exits, nor did it have a fire escape. You're on the 11th floor, folks. If you're going to jump out the window, you're dead. Well, so they tried running to the front doors. What's the problem? The front doors are chained shut. So they started panicking. They tried to get the front doors unchained. They finally did. As this blaze is spreading across, people are trampling over each other. But now they have the doors unchained. The problem now is this. This door was an ingress door. It was allowed for people to come in. It was an egress door, a door for exiting. So when you had to open the door, you had to open the door inward. But you're panicking. And so here you all are pawing at the door. What are you not going to be able to do? Open it. Why not? Because everyone's pushing against it. Are you going to be in a time of panic saying, whoa, everyone calm down. Everyone take 3 steps back so we can calmly open the door and we'll walk out in an orderly fashion. No, everyone's pushing against this door. Women are getting crushed and trampled. And what ends up happening is that they're never actually able to open the door as their bodies pile up. Women get burned to death. Women jump out of the building and they land on the ground, killing themselves rather than burned to death. And 146 women died. It's not good. And so, because of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire incident, the state of New York and several other states eventually, here's the significance, they began to enact or adopt fire safety regulations. Like what, for example?
Fire extinguisher?
Huh?
Fire extinguisher?
Fire extinguisher, yeah, they would adopt like fire sprinkler systems, fire extinguishers, fire safety valves, fire exits, fire escapes along the outside of the
Not
building.
chaining the door.
Yeah, not chaining doors, that's against the law now. Something else you guys may not notice is that now doors, especially public doors, how do they open? Outwards. And something else you'll notice is that the doors in this classroom, those two doors in the back, you notice they don't have doorknobs. They have bars. The reason why is this, folks. In a moment of panic, when you open a doorknob, right, you have to turn it a certain amount before it opens completely. And if you're panicking, might you turn it but not completely? And so you turn it and you think you've turned it all the way, but you haven't, or your hands are sweaty so you can't turn it all the way. And you panic and you automatically assume the door won't open. So you start panicking because you can't open that door because you're freaking out. You and I think, how could I not open a door? But when you're panicking, are you thinking straight? So you're like trying to open the door, it's not opening, even though you're not opening it completely. And so that's a possibility in these classrooms. So those bars, you know what those bars are called? They're called panic bars. Because if you're in a panic, are you going to have to like try to open a doorknob to get out of this room? No, all you have to do is run into the door and it opens. Is there any way to get that wrong? And that's the importance of these panic bars. Does it require any actual thinking to make sure that door opens? No, it's designed to be extremely safe. When you're panicking, you're running towards the door, it will open when you hit that bar, thus safety. So it's an outward opening door. It has a panic bar. Even like all the like movie theaters, right? They don't have doorknobs. They have panic bars for exit. Otherwise, it's going to be a serious problem. And of course, then you have like those exit lights as well. That's always an improvement. But again, did it require a tragedy for people to wake up and realize these things needed to be done? That's the unfortunate part. And that's usually the hardest part, is that progress never happens until something bad happens first. We're never like, oh, we should totally, put fences around pools. No, let's wait for someone to drown first, and then we'll put fences around pools. I had no idea it was a problem. Or like, if you go swimming with sharks, you should have a fence around you. No, let's see what happens first. If someone dies, then we'll build a fence. See? We're kind of a responsive society, or reactive society. Anyway, folks, did we have some successes in labor?
Yes.
I would say so. I would say labor was more successful than a failure, right? Now, were there still some problems that had yet to be fixed? Sure. But did we get that protection for a 10-hour day? Yeah, we were able to stop, we were able to improve some working conditions. Did we end child labor? No, that's kind of a problem still. But again, is it better than it was before? And that's the important part. It was terrible, now it's not so bad. Still bad, but it's not so bad. So there's some successes in labor reforms. Next major reforms happening at this time that are not very successful, however, are again a push for black rights. This is just review, folks. Go ahead and just write this down real quick. Just kind of jot it back in your notes. Just as a review of both Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, again, wrote the Atlanta Compromise, which fought for economic equality. Did Booker T. Washington want people to go to college?
No, it was the other guy.
It was the other guy. Booker T. Washington wanted people just to learn how to work, right? Work with their hands. Promote economic equality. And he wrote Up From Slavery. Webb Du Bois, on the other hand, he wrote that he was a part of the Niagara movement. He believed in complete equality, that people should go to college. He believed in the idea of the talented tenth, and he created the NAACP. So again, both different goals to try to improve the situation of blacks in America. And the question is, did they succeed at this time? Did we end Jim Crow by the time they were done? No, unfortunately not. It's not until the 1950s that we actually have some real progress in the civil rights movement. But are they trying? Sure, but with very little success. Very little success at this time.
May I go to the next?
Yes, you may. Everyone good? Okay. Five seconds. 4, 3, 2. Another famous woman that you should know that tried to fight against, or tried to fight for black rights is Ida B. Wells, not to be confused with Ida Tarbell. Ida B. Wells was another muckraker, and she wrote about Southern lynching. Because despite Reconstruction being over, were whites still harassing blacks? And they were murdering them on a huge rate. And so here is unfortunately an actual photo of blacks who were lynched in the South. And again, are those white people upset about what happened? No, if you notice, what are some of those people doing? They're smiling, pointing, like, look what we just did. Almost like it's a badge of pride. And so were a lot of Northerners, did they kind of forget that this was still happening in the South? Sure. And so Ida B. Wells began to write about lynching in the South to help the Southerners, or help Northerners be reminded that Reconstruction in the South wasn't done, that there was still horribleness going on in the South. Again, that Reconstruction was incomplete. Now, some things did change for blacks during World War I. During World War I, there was the Great Northern Migration. Why did many blacks in the South decide to move north during World War I? Many did fight in the war. Well, yeah, they're going to go move away from the South, but why move north? To work. Because what did many of the men do during World War I? They went out to fight. And are there now a lot of available jobs in the North? So what many blacks did during World War I was during the Great Northern Migration, many Southern blacks moved north to work in defense industry factories. They began to work in war factories to help make guns, bullets, whatever else. Other blacks, what did they do? They fought in World War I. The interesting thing about this, though, was that even during World War I, despite blacks fighting for their country, the armies were still segregated. White troops did not fight with black troops. In fact, many American commanders were so racist, though, with their personal thoughts of, integration, that they would place black troops under the command of the French because they just didn't know how to work with black troops. And the French had been working with black troops for years already because they had all those African colonies. So African-American troops fought with the French because the white Americans could not handle fighting with black Americans, which is just stupid. You're all being fought by the same guy. Even with a common foe, somehow for a lot of people that was still, their racism was able to overcome that sense of duty to your country. And unfortunately, despite these blacks fighting for their country, fighting to spread democracy, when they came back from World War I, had anything changed for them? Were they thanked for their service in the military? Unfortunately not. So go ahead and write down the title of this, The Crisis by Webb Du Bois. And what I want you to do is I want you to read this quietly to yourself, and then in a moment, talk to your partner and share what is Webb Du Bois saying about the men in the war. Oops. I'll give you guys about 2 minutes. You read this quietly to yourself first. And then when you're done, feel free to speak to your partner. You don't have to whisper. What is Webb Du Bois saying about the war effort? And when you're ready, you can talk to the person next to you.
Oh, me? And that Mr. King, can I go get water?
Okay, let's just choose one person. What is the main argument that Webb Du Bois is making here? Henry, what's Webb Du Bois saying?
Yeah, even though that black go fight for the country and they come back and being discriminated,
I mean, I guess the easiest way to put it is that the country that they fought for continues to hate them. And so, paraphrase this however you will, but in your notes, make sure you just paraphrase. The argument that Webb Du Bois is making here is that the country that we're continuing to fight for, that freedom that we fought for in another country, are we being afforded that same freedom? No. We fought for freedom, and you're not giving it back to us. So one easy way to write about it is that the country that we're fighting for continues to hate us, continues to discriminate us. Which is not good. It's not ideal. So the question we have to ask ourselves then, is the same with women's suffrage and temperance and labor reforms, is, was there any real success for black rights at this time? Unfortunately, what laws still continue to exist? Jim Crow laws, you still have Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal. So is it going to be still more time until blacks gain that sense of equality? Yeah, because there's still segregation in theaters, segregation in the libraries, restaurants, even in the courtrooms. All Negroes are guilty, justice for whites only. So again, that racism still exists. So, that's it for state and municipal reforms. Let's talk about the presidents then. Because up until this point, we talked about reforms that were created by who? The people, right? We talked about reforms that were started by you and I. This next set of reforms are going to be reforms led by who? The presidents. Top-down reforms. I tell you how we're going to make the country better, whereas the previous reforms were about us, the people, wanting to tell the president how we want to make the country better. So you kind of have two groups working together to improve America. So we're going to talk about the progressive presidents, T.R., Taft, and Wilson. Also, before I forget, I forgot that I had this. This is from Unit 5 during the Civil War. This is a Civil War codex. What it is that because in America when we were fighting a war, we were fighting pretty much right next door to our enemy. And you never knew who was a spy. So what you would do is you would create a codex like this. It's a circle with several wheels with a tumbler. And what would happen is that you would spell out with one of the rows the message you wanted it to read. Like, the war begins at 8, meet us on like Hillbrook Lane or whatever. And then what you would do is that when your one line said that one phrase, you would look for another random line and to start writing down all the letters. Like, so let's say your phrase was, meet me at 7. It might read UFYKOWXNWCEA. And that would be just gibberish to anyone. And the thing is, if you were just a random person that picked that up, you wouldn't be able to break that cipher unless you had the exact same kind of wheel as someone else. Does that make sense? So what you would do is you would have a wheel with the exact same combination of letters as I would, and then I would send you a note with this sentence. I would give you all the nonsense letters, and you would have to write down those nonsense letters one more time across, and you had to find the message on your cipher wheel. Does that make sense? This was used during the Civil War. I forgot I had this because I just have a bunch of crap in there. But I will pass this around, and then you guys can play with that. Anyway, the progressive presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, are who we're going to be talking about last today. Just as a reminder, you guys remember William McKinley? Well, he was president. And William McKinley was president from 1896 to 1901. Which means what happened to him? He died. But what happened to him first? He was reelected, and then he died after. So William McKinley became president in 1896 until 1901, at which point he was assassinated by a man named Leo Salzgazov. Yeah.
They said if you can give me a note.
So Leo Salzgazov.
How do you feel?
How? He walked up to him and he shot him. He was an anarchist who believed that really any government is bad, so he tried to assassinate. He tried to assassinate the president, and he succeeded. So, Zalzgazov? I mean, I know the CZ is an S sound like Czar, but it's like Zio Kazagazov. I don't know. I'm not very good at pronouncing Eastern European names, so it's Leo. This is my friend Leo Kazagazov. You just kind of trail off at the end. Anyway, so McKinley is assassinated, which means his vice president must assume the presidency, and that vice president is President Theodore Roosevelt, 26th president of the United States, serving from 1901 to 1908. And he is the first progressive president. So you should write him down. If you liked Andrew Jackson, you will like Teddy Roosevelt. Yes, ma'am. They call him Teddy. We'll talk about that. Few things about Teddy Roosevelt, folks. Again, the man was awesome. If you liked Andrew Jackson, then Teddy Roosevelt is a good first or second for you. Teddy Roosevelt, a few things about him. He would always carry a pistol wherever he went. Just a president with a gun on him always. But the crazy thing is he probably didn't need it anyway because he had a black belt in jiu-jitsu and he was a champion boxer. So he was pretty hardcore. He was a master huntsman, so he would hunt animals all the time. He also had a pet lion and bear in the White House because he said, I'm a pretty awesome guy. What kind of pet do you think would suit my grandiose needs and personality? A dog? No. I'm Teddy Roosevelt. A dog won't do. Do you have a king of the forest? Yes, a bear. A bear will do. I'll take a bear. It's not fierce enough, though. How about we give that bear a friend? A lion. Yes, king of the jungle. A lion. I will have a pet lion and a pet bear in the White House basement, whom I will wrestle with whenever I feel like. Because that's what Teddy Roosevelt did. He did those things. I should also know that Teddy Roosevelt was a pretty hardcore guy as well. That wasn't already clear. When he was president, his cavalry, the people that ride horses, they complained that the president would make them ride 25 miles while practicing. And they complained, like, Mr. 25 miles a day of practice riding is way too much. So in order to make them stop complaining, he got on a horse and he rode 100 miles. And then he said, no more complaining. You complain about 25 miles? I just rode 100. No more complaining. Because that's what Teddy Roosevelt did. Instead of allowing you to complain and listen to your complaints, he said, you can't complain anymore because I did something more awesome than you. So, shh. That's Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was many things. He was a cowboy. He was also a historian who wrote several books. He was a police commissioner at one point in New York. He was the naval secretary. He was a Rough Rider. Fun story about that one. He was assistant secretary of the Navy during the Spanish-American War, but he really wanted to fight in the Spanish-American War. But they said, no, you can't fight in the Spanish-American War. You're assistant secretary to the Navy. You have a job to do. So he said, fine, and he quit. And then him and his friends went to Puerto Rico to go fight in the Spanish-American War as a Rough Rider on his own because he just wanted to fight in a war. He was also governor of New York. He was also vice president. He was also president. He was also peacemaker. He helped end some of the wars in America, or some of the wars in the world. He was also one of the mightiest hunters of all time. What have you done with your life? This is Teddy Roosevelt. All the things that Teddy Roosevelt did. And we'll learn more about him. But these are the things that Teddy Roosevelt did. When Teddy Roosevelt died, they said about Teddy Roosevelt, death had to take Teddy Roosevelt in his sleep, because if he took him awake, there would be such a fight. Because death was afraid of Teddy Roosevelt. And so if death wanted to take Teddy Roosevelt had to already be asleep. Because otherwise he would have murdered him.
So he died in his sleep.
Yeah, he died of an old age. But, still, Teddy Roosevelt. Crazy guy. Here's Teddy Roosevelt fighting a Sasquatch. Anyway, also Teddy Roosevelt giving a speech once. A man came up to assassinate him and shot him. And then Teddy Roosevelt said, "Take him away." And then he proceeded to give a speech. Because, But your bullet went through him. And he said, all right, so I'm going to give the speech now because I have things to do. Well, Teddy Roosevelt does. So the president used the presidency as a bully pulpit. So first off, pulpit. What is a pulpit? Not like pulp in a fruit.
Control.
It's not control per se. Where can you find a pulpit? Not in fruit. You know where the minister or the priest stands in church? That's a pulpit. That's what a pulpit is. And so, a famous quote that he says was, "I suppose my critics will call that preaching, but I have got such a bully pulpit." What the president wanted to do was use the presidency to promote what? He would use the presidency to promote social reforms. Instead of just being a president that did nothing, he was going to be an active president that tried to change America. And was he going to use the force of his office to change America? That's what I mean, him using the presidency as a pulpit. Now, the word bully, by the way, the bully is slang. Bully does not mean like a bully. Bully back then, 1900, meant cool. So bully is what he would say. If he shot a bear between the eyes, he'd be like, bully! He was so proud of himself. Or I have such a bully pulpit, such a cool office to have to be able to change America. So if you were ever, walking down the street and you heard a friend talking about a good movie, have you seen American Hustle? That's such a bully movie. Such a cool movie to watch. So spread it with your friends. Use the word bully. Bring it back. You can be a bully, like a cool bully. You bully other bullies, thus making you bully. He promoted a progressive agenda, also known as the 3 C's. Conservation, which means he wants to fix what? Or protect what? When we talk about conservation, we're talking about protecting the environment. He also believed in corporate regulation and consumer protection. So the 3 C's: conservation, environment, and corporate regulation. So the 3 C's. If Teddy Roosevelt and Andrew Jackson fought, I don't know who would win. I really don't know who would win that fight. but it would be a fight to behold. Like the world would crack as like they fought, blow for blow. That would be an amazing fight. Anyway, everyone good with this list of three? 3 C's? Okay. The first was conservation. That's a moose. Fun fact, that's not a real photo. It was a campaign photo used, but it's kind of like Photoshop of its day, where they put a picture of Teddy Roosevelt on top of a picture of a moose to make him look like he was riding a moose. The reason why is because when Teddy Roosevelt ran for president again in 1912, he ran as a member of his new party called the Bull Moose Party. He lost. But that's not important. It's not a real picture of him riding a moose, but still, it kind of symbolizes what Teddy Roosevelt stands for, a man who rides moose in lakes. Anyway, he believed in conservation, and he passed what is known as the Forest Reserve Act. And what the Forest Reserve Act did was it created the national park system. It created the national park system. In fact, folks, he ended up creating 5 national parks. Can anyone name a national park? Yosemite? What's another one? Yellowstone. What are the others? I have no idea. I don't know any of the other ones. I know there's like California parks, but yeah. So he created national parks, and again, he set aside 150 million acres of land for these national parks because if he didn't do that, what would have happened to all this land eventually? What would we have done with it as a country? Industrialized it. Can you imagine today there not being like forests? But that was a potential because weren't we industrializing very quickly at this time? We could have taken up, torn up all the forests, used it for lumber, destroyed all the mountains to use it for coal. But he had the foresight to say, this is beautiful. And if we don't protect this now, our children aren't going to be able to see it ever again. So he protected that. What have you done with your life? You guys protected any national forest recently? I think not. Consider it. Fun story of the teddy bear. You guys are familiar with the origin story of the teddy bear? You know the story of the teddy bear? Okay, so the teddy bear is actually named after Teddy Roosevelt. Here's what happened. Teddy Roosevelt went hunting one day for bears. He does this pretty often. Well, one day he was pretty upset that he couldn't find a bear to hunt. So he sat at his campfire all sad and upset, like, I can't find a bear to shoot. And so his other hunting colleagues decided to go find a bear for him. And one of his hunting colleagues shot a bear, but it got away. So he sent his dogs after the bear. The dogs were like biting the bear and attacking the bear. And they chased the bear for like hours and hours and hours until the bear was eventually exhausted. And they put a collar around the bear, a rope, and they dragged the bear back all the way to the president. And they said, Mr. President, here's that bear you were looking for. And he looked at it and said, I'm not going to shoot a defenseless bear tied up. No, I won't shoot this bear. And that story got around that Teddy Roosevelt refused to shoot a defenseless bear. And so these kids were so enamored by the story of Teddy Roosevelt protecting this bear that they named their bear after Teddy Roosevelt. Hence the term teddy bear. That's where that comes from. Now, fun fact. No, actually not fun fact. That bear that he didn't shoot, you guys assume it didn't die, right? No, that bear totally died. Because it was dying already. It was suffering. It had a bullet wound already. It was bitten by dogs. It was exhausted. So Teddy Roosevelt said, no, I won't shoot this bear. You do it. So someone else killed that bear. But that bear was going to die anyway. But Teddy Roosevelt said, it won't be by my gun because that's not hunting. Can you be considered a fisherman if you go fishing in a fish tank? Hey, I'm pretty good. You see me? I caught this catfish at the grocery store. I'm very proud of myself. I went crabbing the other day at Albertsons. I brought a crab cage and it just walked right in. I'm very good. But Teddy Roosevelt said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's not hunting. That's not what a man does. I'm not going to kill a defenseless bear. And so kids were so happy about that they named the teddy bear after him. But yeah, that's where teddy bear comes from. Theodore Roosevelt. There's a teddy bear up there. It's an LP jacket. Anyway, part 2 of his agenda was corporate regulation. Teddy Roosevelt decided that businesses had too much power in America. So he wanted to regulate them. So one of the first things that Teddy Roosevelt decided to do was to apply the Sherman Antitrust Act aggressively. He decided to apply the Sherman Antitrust Act aggressively. Because what was the Sherman Antitrust Act supposed to do? Way back when in 1890 when it was passed, what was its purpose? It's in the name. What was it supposed to do? Destroy trusts. How many trusts did we destroy up until now? 0. Because what instead did we use the Sherman Antitrust Act on? We used it on labor unions. So were we using the Sherman Antitrust Act against trusts? No. And Teddy Roosevelt realized this is bad. We can't have all these trusts. It's bad for the economy. So what Teddy Roosevelt decided to do was to become a trust buster. He began to break up large monopolies and companies. So he's a trust buster, not to be confused with a ghost buster. Now, here in this image here, you see Teddy Roosevelt squeezing these trusts to squeeze out all the money in hopes of giving that money to who? The poor, the people, back to society, right? Because does Rockefeller really need $90 million? I think he'll be good with like $85 million. Or even $5 million. The 85 can go to the rest of society. But he wants to squeeze all that money out and give it back to society. The most important example of him busting a trust, here again, by the way, Sherman Antitrust Act. What was it before? Sherman Antitrust Act was dead, right? So what did he do? He revived it, and now it's fighting to destroy all these trusts and punching people in the face. That's the kind of Sherman Antitrust Act that he wanted. And so, Teddy Roosevelt, that trust buster, in the Supreme Court case of Northern Securities Company v. U.S., Teddy Roosevelt busted the Northern Securities Company. And yes, that is an image of Teddy Roosevelt wrestling a train. Because what else would you have Teddy Roosevelt doing? Signing a bill? No. Teddy Roosevelt wrestled trains. That's what he did. So Teddy Roosevelt busted Northern Securities Company, which was a railroad monopoly. And here's the thing, folks. Northern Securities Company was owned by J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller. Which means, was Teddy Roosevelt, or TR, going against the most powerful people in the country? He went against J.P. Morgan, who owned almost every bank. He owned a quarter of railroads and controlled almost 80% of all the steel in America. And he went against J.P. Morgan, he went against Rockefeller, who owned 90% of all the oil. These are some of the most powerful people in the country, and Teddy Roosevelt said, no, you don't get to control this country anymore. And so he busted Northern Securities Company. In fact, he earned the name Trust Buster because he busted 44 other trusts. So Teddy Roosevelt earns the nickname Trust Buster because he busted 44 other trusts. Large companies that he decided was bad for America. So he earns that nickname, Trust Buster. Good so far? Okay. Well, other things he did. He passed what is known as the Elkins Act. And what the Elkins Act did was it banned railroad rebates because the railroads were still super corrupt. So the Elkins Act banned railroad rebates. Pretty easy there. It banned railroad rebates. You guys remember rebates where they would give like secret money back to like big companies? Well, you can't do that anymore. Every person must have the same rate regardless of being a big or small company. Try to make it equal for farmers and companies. And he also passed the Hepburn Act. And the Hepburn Act investigated railroad corruption, or tried to end railroad corruption. You know, the bribing of politicians, journalists, that whole credit mobilier stuff. Because that bill was beat up in Congress. But who's helping him along the way? Little teddy bear. That bear's everywhere. Chilling. It tried to end railroad corruption. So is Teddy Roosevelt being involved in society? I mean, have you seen another president as involved as Teddy Roosevelt so far? No, he's like passing law after law, involved in society, politics, the economy. He's a very progressive president. You guys see what I mean by that? He's involved. He's trying to change. He's not just sitting back and saying, he's not Grant who just lets things happen. He's going to change society. He's going to change the way America works. But here's the thing about Teddy Roosevelt, though. He did distinguish between good trusts and bad trusts. He said that if a trust or monopoly was good, we should keep it. But if we keep that monopoly or trust, it should be regulated. So he believed that we should regulate good trusts. But if it's a bad trust, what should we do? We should bust it. We should destroy it. Because are there some good trusts? One really good example, folks, is electricity. Who do you guys buy your electricity from? Southern California Edison. If you don't like Southern California Edison, can you buy your electricity from somewhere else? No, you're stuck with Southern California Edison. Edison has a monopoly, right? On the entirety of La Puente. But can Edison just charge whatever it wants? No, because Edison is regulated by the government. Does that make sense, folks? And is Edison a necessary monopoly? We need one company to do it all. What if you had like 3 companies powering the La Puente electricity grid? Would that be a problem if there was a blackout? Like some places did and didn't work, and what if they didn't work together well? So he said we should regulate the good trusts, but bust the bad trusts. So let's look at this cartoon real quick, folks. What happened to the good trust according to this cartoon? The good trust. Yeah, it's being tamed, right? We are controlling the good trusts. What happened to the bad trusts? We killed the bad trusts. And here's his other friend in the back. He's carrying rifles. Not corpses of bears, which is what the other class thought. Like, is he just carrying a bag of dead bears? I'm like, no, that's terrible. Why would that be a corpse of bears in his bag? Like their feet?
The feet,
Yeah, no, but it's the butt of rifles, because otherwise that's just really horrid. Like, oh yeah, you see that cute bear in the back? Him carrying the corpses of his fellow men as Teddy Roosevelt continues to kill and murder more? It's adorable. Carrying bloody bodies in a bag. Because that's what's happening in this cartoon. You're all morbid individuals. Anyway, he did that. But again, isn't this kind of the story of what Teddy Roosevelt is? He was one man who stood against the giants of industry, of Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, and Jay Gould. These very powerful men. And J.P. Morgan said, Teddy Roosevelt said, I'm going to stand against you. He was like Hercules against the giants. Is that a story? I imagine so. Hercules fought giants, and here they are doing it. Or like James and the Giant's Peach, I guess. Except his name is Teddy Roosevelt, and he has a sword instead of a peach. So, that's what he did. Then there's a square deal. This is not Minecraft, as many of you might think. But the square deal was something else that tried to promote regulation. Minecraft is something I need to start playing at some point. I imagine that it is fun. It's just that both my brothers play it. I don't know. I'll have to try it. You guys are familiar with Minecraft?
Yeah, you can play Hunger Games in Minecraft. Like you build a map and then.
See, but that's just too much for me. I feel like it's bad for my meticulous nature to play something like that. I'll get too addicted. a very addictive personality to like things that require a lot of attention, and I'll just like get all into it. That's why history appeals to me, because history is just like everything you have to know. So like, oh, I'm gonna learn everything because that's just my nature. Anyway, square deal. When you say you're going to give someone a square deal, what does that mean? A fair deal, right? Because a square is equal on all sides, right? So the idea behind a square deal was that Teddy Roosevelt wanted to give a fair deal to business, labor, and the people. He wanted to give a fair deal to business, labor, and the people. Because in most cases, presidents in the past have sided with who? Like during the labor strikes, who did the president sign with? They sided with business. And so he's saying, no, I'm going to side with everyone. I want to make sure that businesses, labor, and the people all get a fair deal. Well, this came to pass during the anthracite coal mine strike. This is not Teddy Roosevelt punching a guy. This is miners versus mine owners. In the anthracite coal mine strike, there was a strike. That's not that unusual. That happens from time to time. So there was a strike, and what happened was that it was a bad time to have a strike, this anthracite coal mine strike, because winter was coming. Okay? And if winter is coming, why is it bad for there to be a coal strike?
Because the coal would be dark.
No. Why does the American public need coal?
To keep warm.
For warmth, right? If it's going to get really, really cold and they're not producing coal, that's kind of a problem. And so Teddy Roosevelt said, whoa, you guys got to knock this strike off. And what he did was he invited the workers and the mine owners to the White House. And what he did then was he stopped the coal strike by threatening the mine owners. Not with their lives, but he said, if the mine owners did not negotiate, and here's the part you should know, he said that if mine owners did not negotiate, if the mine owners did not negotiate, Teddy Roosevelt would nationalize the mines with federal troops. If the mine owners did not negotiate, he would nationalize the mines with federal troops. What does it mean to nationalize an industry? To nationalize something. Anyone know what that term means? Want to take a guess what it means to nationalize something? Not to make it patriotic. It's going to be taken over by the government. Let's say you own, a McDonald's down the street and you're not doing your job. I'm going to nationalize that McDonald's and make it an American McDonald's or something. I'm going to nationalize that business. So he said he was going to nationalize the coal mine with federal troops, saying he's going to take it over. That's what it means to nationalize. Do the mine owners want that? No. So they agreed to negotiate, and Teddy Roosevelt ended the coal strike. But here's the important part. This is the first time a president used federal troops against who? Industry. Who did we always use federal troops against? The workers. But now we're saying, no, the president's on the side of the people, and no more are we going to let the business owners dictate how society and the economy is going to run. So again, look at this image of Teddy Roosevelt. Again, is this him just like sitting down behind a desk signing laws? No, he's a cowboy preventing the coal strike. Here he is shooting a wolf representing the coal strike. Again, these are these big, grandiose images of Teddy Roosevelt as like this manliest of men. The last thing we'll talk about today then is consumer protection. And Teddy Roosevelt believed in consumer protection. And he was inspired by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Are you guys familiar with this book, The Jungle? It has nothing to do with the Jungle Book. Very different. So, The Jungle.
These books that these people write, are they still out, like,
Yeah, I have a copy of it.
You have a copy out?
Not this edition, but you can find copies of this edition. This is the first edition. I have like the third edition of The Jungle. Yeah. But no, you can still buy them today. And I think if they've been around for a while, you can find them online. Like they're in the public domain now because they've been out for such a long time. But anyway, if you get it, you can get it for free online. I think because it's been copyright laws for works like this only last, I think, like 50 years. So if after 50 years you can just like Shakespeare, you don't have to pay for Shakespeare anymore. It's free online. I think it might be true for this book as well. For books that exceed have been around for a long time, they're part of the public domain, which means they're free. Other books, if you want like an actual hard copy though, I think I only bought mine for like $12. They're pretty cheap, and if you go to a used bookstore, you can find some really old books for a good price. If you just know what to look for. Anyway, folks, inspired by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, this book is about the horrible meat packing conditions. They're about horrible meat packing conditions. They're about horrible meat packing conditions. And we'll go ahead and end there today because I want to make sure that I don't spoil your lunch.